Hello everyone. Today I will be featuring a rather interesting game. When this matchmaking popped up, basically multiple tier 9s, 2 Misashis, tier 8 carrier, what you could a Kitakaze, a Bliska, basically essentially nightmare status matchmaking for the Boise. My chat basically started laughing and said, well, this is going to be a very short game. And that's exactly why I'm showing it. The Boise, Tier 7 American Premium Cruiser. I've never actually featured this one. I briefly recommended the Nueve de Julio, which is technically the same ship, but I've never actually gone in depth on how to play the ship. Also, briefly, big thank you to the guys taking the time to drop a subscription on my channel or dropping a follow on my Twitch channel. I appreciate it. Still grinding for that 100k on both channels, so any possible help is greatly appreciated. And now, the Boise. You can see the concealment is actually very good on the ship, 10.4 kilometers. That is of course building for concealment expert, which in my opinion you clearly should because, well, it's a light cruiser. And Boise really brings the meaning of light into cruiser. This thing is very squishy when it comes to armor. 60mm plating across the board. What this means is that yes, you can angle against cruisers and you can mitigate the damage of cruisers, but pretty much everything, battleships or large cruisers or just the battle cruisers, any type of guns, basically if they're 230mm guns or larger, they will be matching your 60mm plating. And you have that plating on the bow, the stern, the upper belt, the deck armor. So if you're fighting a cruiser, you angle. If you're fighting anything else, just try to not get hit, because those are really your options. The Citadel is small though. It's only very much in the very center of the ship and barely extends above the waterline, and it's 127mm, so if you angle it, you can mitigate the chance of Citadel significantly. The ship is not easy to Citadel, but it can happen, and it is extremely crippling, of course, because in World of Warships, the damage you can heal is dependent on what the damage type it is. Light damage, like fires and flooding, you can heal 100% of. Penetrations, you can heal 50% off. Some ships have 60, 65, but in general, it's about 50. And then Citadels, you can heal the least of. It's 30% for cruisers and 10% for BBs. But once again, this is not written in stones. There are exceptions. Regardless, you want to of course avoid them because, as you can see, the ship has 4 healing consumables, which are basically integral to this ship. First things first, the ship is insanely limited on range. 13.6 kilometers, which means you want to be doing what I'm doing as much as possible, which is hiding behind islands, taking pot shots, and if you're spotted, well, you want to get the hell behind the island again, because everyone will try taking pot shots at you. The ship accelerates and handles quite well though, so you don't really have too many issues of keeping yourself in cover. You know, time angle, and I'm just going to move behind this island. Once I feel fairly safe though, I am continually still trading. Whereas something like a Helena in this situation would try to duck completely behind the island because he doesn't want to take any incoming fire. You're actually pretty okay with dealing chip damage in the Boise. You're perfectly okay with this, and this is because of the heal. So essentially the Boise trades a lot of features from the Helena in order to get access to the heal. And because you have this heal, you're much more lenient when it comes to taking a bit of damage in return for dealing damage. In this case, I was able to deal a fair bit of damage to this Bismarck. In return, I took some chip damage, but because of the heal, this is not permanent damage. If this was a cruiser without heal, I would not have wanted to eat any of this damage. So you can play a bit more ballsy than you could in other cruisers, and you can be a bit more aggressive when it comes to taking trades, mostly because you have access to this sustain, this heal that you can use later. Note that the ship has the same health as the Helena, but as I mentioned, you trade off a fair bit of things. First of all, your speed is only 30 knots, whereas Helena is 32.5, and 30 knots at tier 7, or well, basically any tier for a cruiser, is just poor. It is a slow ship. The handling is identical, the turning circle is very slightly worse. But more importantly, the speed is slow, so you need to make sure that if you're playing behind islands like I'm here, you never put yourself in a position where you can get run down and killed. And in fact, if you look at the minimap, you see how the rest of my team is playing on the border. The enemy team is gearing up for quite a push here, and There's even carrier harass and potential crossfires. So this position I'm in is obviously becoming more volatile by the second. And this is something you need to recognize. This requires, of course, experience. This requires map awareness. But you need to recognize that some situations are just not comfortable for the Boise. Also, if you can't use islands, especially in matchmaking like this, where you're up against multiple tier 9s, or just if you're up against a lot of firepower, a lot of battleships, a lot of potential crossfires, that's when it's usually just better to abandon the flank. Go try your luck somewhere else, where there's not so much devastating firepower coming your way. The range, as I mentioned, 13.6, Helena has 14.6, it is extremely limited and it can make life quite difficult. However, you have access to 1552mm guns. I think your fire chance is, the base fire chance is something like 12%, so you're actually a really good fire starter, especially because you're throwing out so many shells. The reload is worse than Helena's, your reload is 10, Helena's is 8.5, so that's honestly a pretty significant DPM trade-off. And of course you're not going to have anywhere near the reload of something like the Atlanta or whatever, but your DPM is still good. You are a good, as long as you can bring your guns up on target, you are a very good ship. Of course, I highly recommend IFHE, as on all of these 150-ish millimeter guns, especially HE spammers, being able to pen that 32mm plating is integral. So IFHE is basically a must-have build on the Boise. There's really no debate on that. Overall though, I don't like this position. There's, you note that they're getting DDs into the center of the cap, which will give them vision, and they're pushing around that flank quite aggressively as well. So I decided, you know what, this is not a safe position anymore. I don't feel comfortable trading on this side. And this is something you just need to recognize. And you need to get out among as one of the first cruisers in the Boise, because you don't trade well in the open if they have any large caliber guns. Once again, because of that overmatch, you can't bounce any of it, and because you're so damn slow, you need to be moving extremely quickly. As I've said before, if you're playing a cruiser, especially a light cruiser, you want to find situations where you can deal damage without taking any return damage. That is your strength as a cruiser. You don't have health, you don't have armor, but you have damage. So you want to put yourself into situations where you can utilize your strength, deal damage, while at the same time mitigating your weakness, which is not being able to tank any hits. So obviously island cover wherever you can find it. Moving on. The pen is actually quite identical to Helena's, only difference being that he has better range. Overall though, it is light caliber shells, so unless, let's say, you're within 10 kilometers, I probably wouldn't even be touching AP much at all. The HE just tends to deal much more consistent damage, and even within 10 it depends heavily on what ship you're actually shooting. Note that this Graf Zeppelin, his AP bombers were here, so I popped defensive AA. He recalled them, so I instantly, look at the consumable, I disable and enable AA again. And what this does is it forces the consumable on cooldown. So if another strike comes in, my AA defense consumable will be available much sooner than it normally would be. This is the only consumable that you can manually force to disable by turning AA off. And it's useful in these situations where I don't need AA anymore, because he actually recalled the planes, so I just wanted to be ready for the next strike. Speaking of AA, Boise's AA is not actually that impressive. It's once again worse than Helena's. Even though the DPM values are not that bad, the difference is that your range is 4.8 on the AA. Helena has 5.8. Even Atlanta has 5.8. So whereas the DPM is quite good, the lack of range on the AA is a weakness. This Kitakaze, smoke fades just as I come charging into the cap. He did not expect to see me come sailing around the map. He thought he had a good position where he could kind of farm this Vladivostok, and now he's trying to reverse behind an island, but because I basically repositioned from an unexpected angle, we created a crossfire, and this Kitakaze is hopelessly extended, and we secured a kill on him. Note that the battleship Musashi is behind the island, so I know he can't shoot me, so the only thing that could shoot me is the Seattle. And when it comes to open water trading against other light cruisers, generally you want to do it. Basically anything you can face as a light cruiser, you kind of want to be trading. If it comes to trading HE in the open like this, the damage you're basically trading is normal HE pens and fires. Fires, as I mentioned, you heal 100% of. The 50% pens, the HE pens you heal 50% of. if I trade with him, even though he's tier 9, and he will probably out-trade me in damage, I still have access to the heals. And speaking of the heals, they are kinda the boys' specialty. He has a special super heal that if you're running the heal flag, can heal for 2.4% per tick, and it ticks every second for 20 seconds, so obviously that adds up to 48% healing. And this 48% healing is, well, basically half your health, obviously. In reality, though, you will rarely, if ever, actually be able to heal that much per pop. Because, once again, you don't have enough health pool to ever really get the opportunity, and most of the time you want to be using the heals a bit more safely, a bit more often, so you have them available the next time you need them. But like, I've already used the heal, even though I was nowhere near being able to heal half, just because you have so many of them, and basically, the Boise is one of the few ships that has significantly more healing utility than it can make use of, so you can be much more liberal with the use of the heal. Note that he smoked up, and I'm almost certain he torped, so a good position to go. If you think Aditi is torping, he's kind of stuck. I'm still keeping him stuck there, but I also suspect he torped, so we're gonna go behind this island until we get some vision of these torpedoes. Because we're not running any Hydra, and there's the first set of the torps. Bliska, of course, has 2x3. My fires burn him to death, so I know there shouldn't be any more torps coming in. I'm turning in just in case there's additional, once again defensive AA to help with the carrier, but it's a tier 8 carrier and I got tier 7 questionable AA, so we're not really doing too much. And here's the second set of torpedoes. They hit the island. Luckily, we went behind it and not in front of it, just to make sure we don't eat this. You don't want to be eating torpedoes in the Boise. This is something very, very important. Whereas some heavy cruisers in general tend to have some form of torpedo protection, 19-20%-ish. The Boise as a light cruiser has a 0 torpedo protection, which means if you eat a torp on the side, you can eat as much as, well, 2/3 of your health in a single torpedo. So, yeah. It's even worth giving broadside just to BBs to try to dodge torpedoes, because BBs have a high chance of overpenning you and not hitting your citadel, whereas the torpedo is guaranteed massive damage. So this is one of those few ships where you rather risk the broadside than eat the torpedo. I found a nice position here. The Musashi is pushing in towards the objective, so obviously I'm trying to position behind this island. Note that because this is a light cruiser with light American guns, we have pretty high arcs. And pretty high arcs means that, of course, I can hide behind the islands and lob shells, and even though he had vision of me, I made sure I reversed behind the highest part of this island, so I knew that even if he... Well, even though if he locked his guns and shot on me, his shells would hit the island and would be unable to reach my citadel. That is the advantage of course, these lazy arcs. The downside is that it can be hard to hit DDs at range or any fast targets at range, but the upside is this. Being able to hide behind islands and just farm, farm, farm. And if you can get all 15 guns on target like this, the damage you can pump out in the ship is actually quite significant, and as I mentioned earlier, the fire chance is also quite significant. So you can be a real pain in the butt with this thing. Keep in mind though, Boise does not have any torpedoes, so if you run into something like Fiji or Atlanta or something like this and they manage to make it into a really, really close range brawl, unless you dodge all the torps, you're losing that brawl. Because, as I mentioned, no torpedo belt. And torpedo damage, of course, also counts as citadel damage, so you can't really heal it as much as you could any other damage. So just in general, torpedoes are a big no-no for the Boise and something to be avoided at all cost. Note that this kind of range, even if it's a battleship, if it starts giving full broadside, switching to AP is absolutely a viable option because you can score pens. And full pens, especially on bow and stern, are very effective. Note that when we look at the Musashi, we see his nose is not saturated. You see how the nose is not darkened, the camo is light colored, aka normal colored, which means that we can just farm it for full penetrations. Once it gets darkened, it means it's saturated. Basically, it's damaged. It's a damaged section of the ship, and this will lead to much less damage when hitting it. The carrier finishes him, which is unfortunate. Now here, so basically at this point I'm talking to chat. Someone in chat says something. I thought I left my rudder on straight while I was talking to chat, but in fact I think I had tapped Q once, so it's in a very, very lazy turn towards the left while I'm talking to chat. So no, I did in fact not entirely miss that there is a huge island in front of me. I was merely not looking at my screen as I was talking to chat about this match. And then I look back and I realize, oh god, oh no way. So this is, I guess, the unfortunate grounding of this game. Pretty avoidable, clearly. Still though, in this point, I know that the Seattle up north is at least low HP, and I think one of their ways back into the game would be securing this objective and getting some sort of crossfire, not just on me, but on my low HP Vladivostok, as well as potentially killing my carrier that is, well, really vulnerable in B. We still have 3 heals left, so it's time to play some aggression here. So we're gonna push in and see if not only if we can defend this cap, but if we can take these guys on. Now, when you're fighting 2 versus 1 with cruisers, you have to get rid of one first. As I mentioned, cruisers in general, squishy class, a lot of damage. Even though you just deal with the bigger threat first, or you just deal with the low HP ship first. In this case, the Seattle is caught, so we instantly start shooting him. He had AP loaded, which is fortunate for us, because his first volley is thus not going to do much at all. He switches to HE, but at this point we already managed to finish him off. The other ship is a Zara, the new Italian cruiser. Once again, note that I'm very conservative with the heal. In this case, I haven't really taken that much damage, but I'm already considering using it just to give me that edge in this fight. Although he does pop up, he doesn't disengage, so we're just going to be taking this fight until we see if he uses his smoke. Speaking of the Italians though, he uses sap, which means of course he's forced... Well, his damage is greatly mitigated as long as I angle steeply. So I'm not, if this was another cruiser, I would not be afraid to use more guns. But because it's an Italian cruiser with sap, we stay extremely angled and we just mitigate his damage as much as possible. And we use an early heal. We have 1 minute 15 until the next one. But as long as we stay nose in, this health should be more than enough to sustain us until our next heal comes up. Once again, this is how you want to take cruiser fights in the Boise. You want to extend them, you want to draw them out. You don't want these sudden decisive brawls, broadside to broadside, both sides shooting each other, citadel and blap, whoever gets the better volley instantly wins. Because those are risky. Or you go into a brawl, if you can dodge the torps you'll win, if you don't you die. These situations are risky. You want to play it calculated to your advantages. And playing to your advantages is drawing the fight out as long as possible, because if you draw the fight out, you get access to additional heals. And sadly though, he smokes up and starts fleeing. I had about 40 seconds until the next heal was about to come up, but my team actually managed to eliminate all the opposing members on the other side, so I couldn't really show how to draw this fight out even further. But in general, if you want to mitigate his damage as much as possible, and even if it means mitigating your own. Because if you're P shooting at each other, but he doesn't have a heal, you will eventually come out victorious in that fight. By a decisive margin, especially in the Boise because of that heal. So, in general you want to avoid those brawling decisive big battles. You want chip damage, you want to deal chip damage, and you want to take chip damage. I mean, of course, if you can deal heavy damage, that's fantastic, but not if it comes at a cost of heavy damage to yourself. No, extended, drawn-out fights is what Boise is especially good at. Anyway, the game ends. 145,000. Only 4 kills. I didn't get that 5th. I would have liked to have gotten that 5th, because that would have been my Kraken, which would have been a pretty good statement considering the reaction I got in chat, especially when this game started and they saw the matchmaking. In fact, looking at the team score, 3000 XP as a tier 7 Boise in this game, and amusingly Algerie actually came second. So very harsh matchmaking with carrier and tier 9 mostly, and the boys are still with the help of islands and just honestly calm, collected positional play. We went on one flank, there was too much pressure on it, there was too much dangerous crossfires. We maneuvered to the other side, we caught some ships off guard by doing this, and once we were on the other side we utilized terrain to deal additional damage. Basically always trying to play to your strengths. That is how you shine in this ship. Detailed scored wise, no surprise I didn't shoot a single shell of AP. Now, towards, for example, when the Musashi turned in and gave broadside, that would have been an opportunity. If some of the cruisers had given me more broadside, that would have been an opportunity. But in general, the HE is very consistent. you just do so much HE DPM with so much fire starting chance that fires or HE is just such a reliable form of damage. Potential damage 1.3 million, perhaps not that impressive. Damage tanked only 25k, which for Boise honestly isn't that much. You can tank a lot more than this. But this was more of a showcase of how important positioning, especially in these light cruisers with this very limited range, just how important it is to be able to trade without being able to trade well. Trading poorly, anyone can do that. You just sell broadside. They shoot you, you shoot them. They probably win, but you traded. No, trading well is what's very hard in World of Warships. Anyways, let me show you guys my recommended build for this ship. Right, as usual, this is the armor that I mentioned. 16, 16, 16, 16. This means overmatch capacity. Anything 230 millimeters and larger overmatches every part of this armor. The only thing you can bounce with is this, your Citadel. Note that you do technically have Citadel all across the map, but it's only really the central part here that it extends above the waterline. So whereas you could technically be Citadel on these other parts at extreme ranges, in close range the only thing that really counts is this thing. Note that if you try to go perfectly nose in like this, they can just overmatch your nose and Citadel you straight through the nose if you're fighting battleships. This flat surface here provides a pretty good section for them. So once again, when it comes to fighting battleships, try not to get shot at all if possible, because you don't really have the tools to deal with them. Module wise, I prefer defensive AA. You can run Hydra as well, but it's standard US Hydra, very short range. And technically your AA, even though I mentioned it's limited in range at only 4.8, the DPM on the mid-range and the short range when you have defensive AA and sector is pretty okay. It's not going to be amazing, it's not going to be any sort of award-winning, but it's going to be enough for carriers to be losing planes if they strike you. Basically, you make them pay for it. And then there's of course the heal. I recommend the premium heal. It heals for a ton per second. Upgrade-wise, turret survival and engine and rudder, because I think you lost rudder a fair bit in this thing. That's why we also run the steering gears modification, additional rudder survival, the AA module, and faster rudder shift. Note that you can absolutely run acceleration module as well, because as you saw in this game, we play a lot behind islands, a lot of positional play where you have to accelerate suddenly when you get spotted and so forth. So I think both work here. I prefer the rudder shift though, because I think it makes the ship more comfortable in cruiser versus cruiser battles, which is something obviously you want to find in this ship. Captain wise, priority target, AR, fire chance before superintendent, because once again, as I said, you have more healing capacity than you can really use. Now you start by enhancing your damage, IFHE, improved penetration. After you have these, build concealment expert, build last stand. I wasn't joking when I said this thing loses rudder. You don't want to be in a situation where you have to damage con your rudder and then you get multiple fires on you. And finally, superintendent for that extra additional heal. Not as important as the others, but very useful. Additionally, you could even skip it and go jack of all trades and expert loader. Another viable option. Either build, in my opinion, works. Anyways, that was the Boise. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you once again for all the support for the channel. Really appreciate it. Grinding towards that 100k. I hope you guys had a great time, and I will see you guys next time.